you, and thank you for joining us.
Well, let's first let all the dignitaries, including
Yes.
my better half, sit in.
It's a 2-for-1. We get the president, we have the first lady here too. So let's. So thank you, and again, thank you for coming. We appreciate you being here. We've done this as a. Oh, sure, I'll take some water. Thank you. This is our 5th time. We took 2 years with COVID. We're so happy to be back. It's our first time having the head of state with us. For those who don't know, Israel, the way it's similar, I guess maybe like the UK. I mean, the Queen Elizabeth is the official head of state, but then you have a prime minister. And we had one of your predecessors, the very first under 30 summit here in Israel. We had Shimon Peres, who was also, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, one of his last interviews ever. And I want to start with something that President Peres said. His quote that I still remember to this day, and he had this very, I don't know if anybody who was here then, but he had this very, soft voice, of course. He was, pushing 90 years old. But he told, a couple hundred young leaders, and, we got, again, 34 countries out here. He said, don't be pessimistic. He said, it's a waste of time. That was his lasting message to this group. Don't be pessimistic.
He did write it in the book that was published after he passed away, which says, no small world for big ideas or something. Don't be small with big ideas. It's clearly said. And Peres was always an optimist, and he's right.
That's right. So let's start maybe on a dose of optimism, because you're not just a figurehead. I mean, you're the face of the nation, and what you've been doing for the last 6 months, it's been noticed obviously around the world. You're traveling. You made the first ever official state visit to the UAE. I think you were back again, a couple weeks ago, for condolences when they lost their head of state. You've been to Turkey, Jordan. You met with Erdogan. You're in Jordan with King Abdullah. So you're putting in the work, and you're really giving glue to the Abraham Accords, it seems. So maybe we could start by talking about that. And as you travel around, it feels optimistic. Do you feel optimistic?
So good morning, everybody. Shalom. Welcome to Israel from all over the world. It's really great to have people from Forbes here. And since you are, global leaders of the future, already some of you, I wish you all well and have a wonderful conference. And I read the program, and I'm envious, totally envious. And Randall was asking something which epitomizes the real change that we are seeing in front of our eyes. So remember, many of you growing up knew one thing only, that there is war between Israel and the Arab world, or there's war between Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people and the Muslim world. And that has changed dramatically. It has changed in an ongoing process. Next year, we will mark 50 years to a watershed war between Israel and its neighbors, what we call the Yom Kippur War. Others call it the 73 October War. And our main enemies then today are our main allies, meaning Jordan and Egypt. And the reason that the change has then occurred was that the first peace agreement was signed with Egypt in 1979. And then we had a peace agreement with Jordan in 1994. And now the Abraham Accords have turned a reality, the fact that Israel has relations with many Muslim nations around us. And we've signed agreements with the United Arab Emirates, with Bahrain, the Kingdom of Bahrain, and the Kingdom of Morocco and Sudan. And I believe that there are other nations that will join suit, that will join us on this immense historical process. Now, what does it mean? What does it mean for me? You mentioned my trip to Turkey. We have relations with Turkey for over 70 years. Turkey is the first Muslim country to recognize Israel, 1950 already. But in the last 15 years, we had very cold relations and a lot of strife and tension. And all of a sudden, through a process which I've been a key pillar of, we are creating warmer relations and a process of convergence of interests. And the reason is, in my mind, that nations are realizing that Israel is a fact of life and is here to stay, and it's actually a benefit to the region. And for me, emotionally, the most important thing is that I want a 10-year-old kid somewhere in the Muslim world to see the pictures of a Jewish leader and a Muslim leader, whether a leader with a kafia in the UAE in his palace, and whether a leader in Ankara in his palace, or in Jordan, in Amman, and so forth. When they shake hands, it means there's an alternative to what other people claim, which is only strife and war. And these are the two avenues of life here. Either we move towards coexistence, living together, moving forward, changing the world, and making it better. And imagine the immense potential of the relations, for example, between Israel and the UAE in all spheres that you're dealing with. Or alternatively, create havoc, terror, pain. And that is our main conflict with Iran. Because wherever Iran is, Lebanon, Syria, Gaza, Yemen, you see havoc, you see collapse, suffering of human beings. And that is the alternative of the region, and that is why I'm putting such an emphasis on it.
Well, again, if you look at the entire world, I mean, right now, I don't think there's a region in the world, especially coming out of COVID, it just feels like politics everywhere is broken. So, you know, there is, I mean, even talking about optimism feels very refreshing because, again, there's not a lot of good stories out there. But even, you know, even looking at this country, I mean, you have, you know, again, we have Jews and Muslims, we have secular and religious, you have hawks and doves. The thing about you that's interesting, though, is you were, the president's elected. Unlike Queen Elizabeth, this is we have an elected head of state here, and you won in the biggest, you're the 11th president, but the biggest landslide ever in the history of Israel. So you seem to be a unifying figure. Maybe you could give us how do you take, we're in a very fractured region, and this country, of course, has gone through many elections, and it's like many countries from most people here, it's, the politics feel broken, but yet you seem to be bringing something. What is the roadmap to a more unified politics?
First of all, we live in an era where we are overly exposed to information, and high-tech has brought us to this reality. I mean, you are under 30, guys, we're a bit older than you, and we remember days when we were not connected, and we remember days where things did not look the same, and yet can't tell you that human beings love each other so well. So the reality of life is changing. And with that change, the reality of life, a lot of good things are happening, but also negative things, as written in the Bible. The question is are human beings bad or mean from the day they were born, or are they better and good? It's a big question. All our lives we'll debate it. We see hyenas attacks in Texas of the worst kind. It's unimaginable. Unfortunately, we see terrible things, but we also see a lot of good. I believe in the immense, what I call hidden light in my nation. As the head of state here, me and my wife, we are seeing incredible people here who are doing a lot of good, Jews and non-Jews of all denominations and all religions. In this tiny country, we have all religions, and there's a lot of coexistence and cooperation. And there is a lot of politics and tension too. This has been our fate throughout. But what I'm trying to say is, my main mission is to go to each group and say, you've got to know the other. You've got to respect the other. You've got to love thy neighbor as thyself. And that's a big mission. We went the other day, Michal and I, to the dialysis department for children in Shaarei Tzedek Hospital in Jerusalem. A huge hospital, a huge medical center. And our medical institutions are world-renowned. And we walk into this department, a small department. In each room, which is a cubicle, you see parents with their child who's connected to the machine. You see Muslim parents. You see ultra-Orthodox parents and kids. You see Christian children, you see secular children, you see Palestinian kids. We saw kids from Gaza being treated in a hospital in Jerusalem by our doctors. And this was so moving because at the end, when you take off all these signs of identity on people's heads, on the clothing, which we fully honor, and we spoke to each and every family, and I say to the head of the department, who wears a big kippah on his head, I said, Doc, is it true all human beings are equal under the Lord Almighty? He says, absolutely. And that's the way we should work. Yes, there are political differences. Yes, we have a mission statement as a nation, but we should respect everyone, and I think the world of technology should serve humanity as much as it can in a way that makes our lives better.
There's a lot of moral clarity there, and I think that raises an interesting question. A lot of leaders in this region and around the world, frankly, and actually not just politics, leadership is exercised by raw power. You have a job that has incredible amount of influence, but it's a moral leadership. I mean, it's, the office is as big as you make it. So, I mean, I guess you're one of the, you're kind of an influencer in your own way. And so how do you exercise, especially we have a lot of leaders here, and we all know that true leadership means you have to bring people. You can't tell them, you have to bring them. How do you exercise that moral leadership?
Okay, that's a beautiful question. First of all, just to identify and say how my job is built. It's comparable, especially in many European and Latin American countries. It's based on the model of monarchy, where there's like a head of state which is a unifier and epitomizes the story and the mission statement of a nation, but he does not have executive powers. There are other nations where the president has somewhat executive powers, and then there is the prime ministers. And there are nations like the United States where the executive and the head of state is one. And, in our model, you have to shine a certain moral light and also explain to all that we all are bound to live together. The strength of this nation, which has a lot of political strifes, believe me, and we have quite a lot of bashing and boxing matches every day. And I come from politics, and I ran for prime minister in 2015, and I came very close against Benjamin Netanyahu. So I know what politics is all about, but I see my mission and my presidency as a source of explaining to people in the moral way and in an emotional way how we are all bound to live here together. All nations, all religions, all faiths. It's complicated, very complicated, especially as the three monotheistic religions stem from this region. But you have to show that there's something goes beyond. And I'll give you two examples of what can unify human beings, topics that some of you deal with. One is the climate. Climate goes way beyond everybody's differences and clearly threatens our lives and our children's lives. And this is something that we can all work together with. And I have founded a major climate forum of Israel with neighbors as well to move these things together. And remember that this region will host the two main conferences on climate in this year and next year, meaning Egypt in Sharm el-Sheikh this November and Abu Dhabi next year, or UAE in November 23. The second issue, which I want to bring, of course, as an example, is space. Is the future of humanity in space. It's also something that people can dream to. So when we had recently the second Israeli astronaut and the first one to fly around and come back, Eitan Stiba, we brought together with the entire NGO world that deals with it, kids from all facets of Israeli society, all religions. It was just fascinating to see how this gives people a certain purpose to look up to and meet their counterparts, their cohort age, from other religions and backgrounds. So there are so many other topics, and I believe that's the way to bring people together.
Do you have any leadership role models? Like who's your role model for your leadership style?
So look, first of all, I'll say a word about myself to all these dear guests who are here, who have not known Israel. I come from a family that serves Israeli history and Jewish history for generations. My grandfather, whom I'm bearing his name, was the first chief rabbi of Israel. It's like equivalent of the Pope or something of that nature. And he was a legendary rabbi. He was also a scientist. My father was a fighter for the independence of Israel, was a general in the army, a very famous diplomat, and the president of the country as well. And I have many uncles and family members who have influenced the world in many, many ways.
You have a nephew on the 30 under 30, right?
I have a nephew. I had a few years back. Yes, it was 30 under 30. So we're a serving family, and therefore I have many examples in my family. But truly, my biggest role model is David Ben-Gurion, the first Prime Minister of Israel, who was a huge leader who fought for independence, but was also a great humanist and a believer in many moral values. And I quote him many, many times.
Being born into that legacy, obviously, you know, it's a blessing in many ways, but probably also a burden. You know, how do you balance that?
It is clearly a burden. Of course, I'm very proud and honored, but it's not easy on me, on our children, on our family. Naturally, we are under the spotlight for many years. And from day one, you are kind of choreographed, or your software is such that you have to be over defensive and more cautious and more restrained in the way you behave. You can't always do that, I must say, but ask my wife. It wasn't easy to date me as well. But all in all, we know how to survive. And the good thing about this place, it's very, very easygoing and nonchalant, less formal, so we manage to keep our lives, at least our kids, when they're not in the limelight, they can run their own lives.
We're definitely the only two people in suits here, that's for sure.
Yes, that's true.
Can you speak to, you were in Unit 8200 when you were in the IDF.
Yes, that's when I met Michal too.
Oh, there you go. We're doing a panel on that later. You know, folks here who aren't familiar, it's the kind of the counterintelligence unit that has birthed many, many startups.
Yeah, well, because it's the technological unit of the state of Israel, and therefore later on other units were developed as well. But when we were in the army and when we grew up, nobody could say that number. You should know that. It was a total national secret.
Right.
It only emerged in the book, the famous book, Startup Nation.
That's right. And now everyone, you know, it's a bragging point when you're raising money. But and again, the trainings obviously very formidable, given how many unicorns have come out. What can you? So having experienced that, what is that? You know, what is the special sauce that you see with Startup Nation?
So first of all, I'll say something about the unit, because it is a unique unit. But you should know, because the origins of it was, of course, that we had to gather intelligence, mostly in Arabic, in means that which required us to be sophisticated with the language and with the content. And those who were dealing with the technological part, when we served, were viewed as like, you know, they're the second tier of the commanders of the unit. Only later did we came to understand how fools we were. We thought we're the smart ones. Then turns out the guys on the technological departments were the ones who are going to make success in technology and high-tech, and of course become unicorns. And we, the idiots, went to politics and whatever, and being professors of Islam and things like that. But the unit later on, because of the huge amount of gathering of information, you had to build infrastructure that are the cornerstone of cyber technology, big data. That was started back in the 80s already. And internet was not in existence then, but you should know that the internet, which is the basic platform for all of what people do in communications, although it's already somewhat obsolete, in 1994, there was a major financial paper, or 1995, who said internet will die within a year. It has no chance. And therefore, what you see in the onset doesn't always mean that this is going to be the truth of new ideas of technology. And I believe that clearly human beings are striving for improved technology with great ideas in so many ways. I only think, I don't know, I'm not a big expert in AI, but I'm trying to think, are we making sure that human beings will still control the machines, or will the machines control human beings?
Probably especially over the last couple of years, a lot of stress, there are a lot of, we talk about it a lot when we talk with the under 30 community. There's a lot of pressure, especially as a founder in a very, very volatile world right now. You have the most, I always find it, we've had a lot of elections here in the last few years. There, may or may not be one coming up. The most stressful part of the president's job is you have to decide who to ask to try to form a government. So whenever these elections happen, there's a lot of pressure on you. I mean, it's a very, the whole world all of a sudden is looking at you when you decide who gets then to create the government. So how do you manage stress when basically, let's say, for a day or two or a week, it's actually a couple of weeks usually, kind of the whole country, the region, and sometimes the world is looking at your decision?
Look, public life is always stressful. And as I said, when I grew up and my father was in public life, I knew that at 10 p.m. I have a dad. Even if it's late, at 10 p.m. the papers shut down. They're gone to print. Today, public life exposes you 24/7. But you guys are in high tech, many of you, you also have a stressful life. So it's different type of stress. You're in stressful life in politics because you're exposed, because you're open to criticism, because social networks bring about a lot of dirt and fake and facts that are wrong and things that offend you and your family. And I can say it correctly, I would take to heart things that were written about my father. I am sure and I know how my kids stood up, how they read all the rubbish that was written about me in politics. And it's not easy at all. It mind boggles family. And therefore, the whole notion of keeping a family in public life is very complicated. You have to shield yourself and cordon yourself off from the noises outside, and it ain't always easy. Now, that's why when you're asking me an example of a decision that I'll have to take, naturally there are precedents, there are sometimes numbers that are clear or not clear, depends on so many questions. And I know that whatever decisions I'll make according to my conscience and according to the law.
I think conscious is the key word there. Last question, because I know we're out of time, but we really, very much appreciate you taking the time. We know you're extremely busy.
I wish you great success, guys. It's wonderful that you're here. Enjoy our country. It's just one of a kind. Yes.
The presidency traditionally for the first 10 presidents was kind of the capstone of a career, right? You're much younger than the average president. And we talk about this a lot with the 30 under 30 community because these are people who have to reinvent themselves. I mean, you guys start a business, you sell it, then what? Then what do you do? What do you do for a second act? What do you do for a third act? What do you do for a fourth act? So what's next for you? You're not done here, so.
So first of all, I want to give an advice to the younger ones here. Try to go into philanthropy once you succeed. It's really important to do good to the others. When you do good to the others, the more you give, the more you get. And you learn it. It's a profession. It's not something that you do and say, oh, you study it and enjoy it, and I wish you all that you'll be able to do it and that you succeed. Because doing good serves a very important purpose in society and gives opportunities to others who did not have opportunity. And whenever I go all over the country and I'm meeting people and I'm saying to myself, one of these children, which you can say perhaps comes from an underprivileged community or from a community that just came to Israel as an immigrant community may be the next president of Israel in a few years' time. That's the way you should look at it. That, as I said in the origins of Judaism, beware of those kids who study the Torah, because they may be the giants of the future. And that's the way we should see it, because striving for information, knowledge, and love of others is the most important things. As for my own personal plans, as you can see, I gave this long answer to avoid your question. As my wife says, if you go to politics, do it with your next wife. All the rest we leave as such. I have enough time to think, but anything that I can do good, I'll be happy to do.
We appreciate your time and the good you've done here. We appreciate your wife. We appreciate Michal, the First Lady. Thank you for coming. In terms of philanthropy, we have Lisa Eisen, the president
Michal
of
works,
the Schusterman Foundation. Thank you for underwriting this.
She started as a criminal lawyer, white collar, and then she went to philanthropy, and she succeeded in it very much so.
So again, we have a lot of philanthropists here. We have a lot of future philanthropists here, but we appreciate your time. We appreciate your wisdom.
All the best to you, and good luck to all of you.
And anybody who flew into this country knows security is very serious here, so we're asking everybody, as the president leaves, we have to stay in our seats.
Thank you.
We have a great morning, great lunch, and an amazing afternoon. We have Sir Ronald Cohen. We have Faux Show, which is the best black Ukrainian Jewish hip-hop act you've ever heard. It's closing up at the end of today. We've got a great morning, lunch, a great afternoon. What a great way to kick it off. Thank you, Mr. President.